You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
You're listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. Today, I have a very special guest join me. I talk with Kriya Lendzion. She is a school counselor who specializes in drug prevention, and we talk about how you can addiction-proof your students on everything from vaping to screens. Kriya is so knowledgeable. She is the expert in this subject. That's why it's part of our expert series that we're doing during the month of April. She's been featured on Ask a Webinars and on Edutopia. So I just know you're going to love this episode with Kriya. Okay, let's dive in. Well, hi, Kriya. How are you today?
I'm awesome. Thanks for asking.
Good.
How's it going there?
It's going great. I am so happy to have you on the podcast. I've been doing solo episodes for a while, but every now and then I get like an itch to do a guest series. It's like a little more work with coordinating schedules and stuff, but it's so worth it. I enjoy doing the guest series more than just talking to myself. And I feel like the listeners love it too. So we can always learn from others. So yeah, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I am a quote unquote retired school counselor. I was a school counselor for 23 years, I think. After 20, you just start kind of losing count. But worked in a lot of diverse environments in private schools and charter schools and elementary through and actually into college, and a lot of diverse settings from inner city to closer to kind of rural and suburban communities. So lots of different kinds of kids and kids alternative schools. So juvenile justice and pregnant and parenting teens, kids kicked out of all the schools, a lot of, again, diverse in all of the ways. And so did that for 23 years, and kind of on the side at the same time have had some private practice as an adolescent clinician and a addiction specialist in particular. So I'm an addiction clinician, and I worked kind of in between my before and in the middle, and afterwards took some gigs as working in treatment. So I did work in adolescent and adult substance use treatment. And now I'm really focusing on the prevention side of that. So as a prevention specialist and combining all of my, years of working in the education system with my expertise in addictions and my prevention lens on it, I'm doing a lot of consultation work with schools in what do we do to create a preventative school environment systemically, so it's about not just about substances, but about all the addictive things which our students are dealing with, from self-harm to all things screens, for sure. And then I, and doing some direct student education. So I do addiction and drug education in my community. They call me the drug lady. So I have to explain sometimes at Trader Joe's, when a kid's like, "Hey, mom, it's the drug lady."
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. But I do direct education, but largely I'm training clinicians, I'm training school counselors, and other educators on kind of what we can do on our watch, in our roles to be preventative and intervene early with kids that are getting into self-destructive stuff. And my own story is my passion that catalyzed the whole thing, honestly, is that I was in rehab at 19 with multiple addictions myself, with a full-blown eating disorder and engaging in self-harm and alcoholism. As soon as I hit college, the things that had been kind of simmering and growing, starting in middle school, and then building through high school, and it really blew up when I was, didn't have the bumpers at the bowling alley anymore to kind of keep me in, is that I just went off the rails really fast. So that I immediately turned that around to inspire my work in schools. I wanted to be what I didn't have,
right,
to be honest, because there were signs that I was heading in that direction, or that I was kind of like itching for something addictive to get involved in, and people weren't catching it, early enough for me. So.
Right. Oh, what an awesome story. Thank you for sharing. I love your variety of experiences is so cool. All the different students that you've worked with. And just hearing that you're doing all the prevention side now, because I am so curious. I know so many counselors are like, oh, they'll like reach out to me like, oh, I need to do something for like Red Ribbon Week or something. But that's like the only time they're thinking about it, right? So I'm like, I love this conversation. And then I know we had mentioned a little bit offline when we were talking about the podcast topic about vaping specifically, which I know is something that's really big right now. When I was working at the international school, we had a problem with the middle schoolers with vaping as well. And I was doing a lesson on that. But again, I did like one lesson on it with the health teacher. So I'm so curious
Yep.
to see what your plans are. So we want to learn from you. So yes, this is part of our
Yeah.
series on the podcast. I'm like interviewing different experts, and you are the substance abuse prevention expert for us. So yeah, just kind of teach us, share with us how counselors can prevent vaping or just these drug abuse of addictive things in general.
Yeah. Well, the the good or the bad thing is that the same principles apply to all of the addictive things. I think so. We can talk about vaping, which and the strategies we're going to use for vaping are going to apply to all substance use prevention intervention. And those strategies are actually going to apply to helping kids be kind of like a quote unquote addiction proof, with all the things. So to give it a framework, I have this, like, I've taken all of the research and put it into kind of 5 different categories. It helps me as an ADD person to have everything organized, right? So the first of those is that kids need to get like the research-based information. The thing that and that's the part that we tend to be better at than others, is like, okay, so we'll do the drug education. We'll watch the videos, we'll have the assembly, we'll teach the lessons in health class. Like, so that's the part we actually tend to do better than others, but it's only part of it. And we also don't always approach it in effective ways. So the things I think to remember about that is, for one, that it's delivered in ways that speaks to their values and their realities. Is that we've got this tendency to, like, I know that we had like the tar covered lung, in the formaldehyde in the jar, or the cirrhosis liver or whatever that is. It's like, does that, we know that kids without formed prefrontal cortexes are not even registering like big picture thinking and future in that kind of way. They know right now what is going to bring them, like fun and connection, and that they're immediate. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But so we need to speak to the things that matter to them. And it's not the same for every kid, for one. So that means that, putting education out about like, well, this is the way that these things can affect friendships, how these can affect your brain growth. So they need to understand adolescent science and how malleable, their growing brains are right now, and how things that they do impact them and form connections, hardwire connections for them into adulthood now, when they're in middle, especially early high school. So them understanding how these things impact their growing brains, how they impact ADHD brains, how they impact mental health and depression and anxiety, how it impacts their appearance, their skin. I know that sounds silly, but kids care more about sometimes about.
Yeah, no, 2 things you mentioned. One, my husband has said this before. We've talked about it, and just like our own experiences, and like, oh gosh, why did we try some of these things so young? I really hope our kids don't do that, And I was always, my family and community's approach was always like through the moral lens of like good versus bad, or like don't do this. And it kind of worked on me. But my husband, he was like, that didn't work on him. And he was like, I wish someone just would have told me like what this was doing to my brain. And so I love that you mentioned that, because he was like, that I probably would have paid more attention if they were like, this is literally making you dumber.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the skin, that's so true. Not only are like young girls more obsessed with skincare now than ever, but I remember one of my high school health teachers or someone showed us the faces of meth, and it was like the pictures of how like over, I don't even remember the amount of time, but a short period of time, this woman,
It's like 3 months.
Yeah. Beautiful woman. It just really changed. And that stuck with me, like still to today. I like remember that. And I was like, oh gosh, like never going to do math.
Yeah. And I'm going to restart my screen because I froze. Okay. So 1 second. Okay. Now you're good, but I'm still frozen, but it's all right. I'm going to carry on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'll keep going. Yeah, so we need to think, speak to, again, their values, that are more immediate,
Right.
kind of more immediate impacts, not just this is what could happen if you do this for 30 or 40 years, because every kid thinks that they are doing it. I was that kid where I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to become whatever that is. Like I'm just doing this for fun now. None of them
Right.
think that they're going to get addicted. They don't know the science of addiction is really important as part of that, like how their brains are really wired for habit forming and wired for addiction because of what fires wires right now, and because
Mhm.
their dopamine is in a deficit. And when it does pop off, it blows up extra big, and then it forms those connections, and then it creates craving in the brain. All of that is really empowering for them. So some of it is that, there's the science-based information, and we need to be doing that in a way that's not judgmental,
Mm.
that's not preachy, that is just sort of like, only you can decide what to do with this information. Because we know that as school counselors, right, we learn motivational interviewing strategies. And that's one of those, is that you kind of give them the like, well, only you can decide what to do with this. You're kind of in control of your life, but here's all the information. And that little way of speaking, speaking that way to them, that they feel respected and they take it in more. As soon as they hear from middle school on anything that sounds like, oh, here go the grown-ups lecturing us again, it goes womp 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 in the
Right.
Charlie Brown voices. So speaking kind of empathetically, honestly, like, we understand why you might go there, but here's so that here's the information. And then the harm reduction approach is really important by the time a kid is in 8th grade and going into high school, is, of course, we want to say, hey, here's all the ways that this could be harmful or risky for you. And you still need, what happened with the DARE program, unfortunately, and with the just say no approach, is that it didn't speak to the kids that were going there and that were having positive experiences so far. It
Right.
wasn't creating anything negative as far as they could see, right? So we need to be able to speak to those kids too, and be able to say, okay, so if you've gotten all this information and you're hell-bent on going there anyway, like,
Yeah.
here's how to not hurt yourself or somebody else, or to reduce the risk of hurting yourself or somebody else if you make that choice.
Hmm.
So
That's such a
so
good point.
so they need to know that vapes, are being laced with other things.
Hmm.
They need to know, I mean, because again, when we're talking screens, for example, right, if we're talking like, it's all a harm reduction conversation, they're going to be on screens.
Right.
So we're talking about like, so how do you curate the things you're exposed to and your feeds so that they're healthy for your mental health? How do you check, keep your timing in check so it's not getting in the way of other things in your life? How do so while we're not going to sound that normalizing about substance use, we still need to be speaking to those kids, because by the time they leave high school, most kids are going to try something.
Hmm.
So we want them to not, we also have a growing number of kids. Unfortunately, the last several years, we saw an explosion of overdoses, of accidental overdoses of kids who were not, quote unquote, those kids. They were the star of the lacrosse team and the class president that took the one pill that had fentanyl in it. So they need to know testing exists, and Narcan exists, and not mixing things, and not,
Right.
all that as well. So those are important conversations. So that's one part of it.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'm like all ears. This is
Yeah,
great.
so that's one part of it. And yeah, we can do that in passive programming, and we can have bulletin boards, and we can have notes in the bathroom, and we can have those things, along with, because like that, we may only be able to budget, this is where it's hard, right? In terms of our resources in schools, is looking at, well, how do we do that education and weave it through as much as possible? Because the point is that they are getting messages that are counteracting this every day. They're getting distorted, mutated messages about the harmlessness, the low harm of all of these things that are really that are way bigger than the 1 hour. Do you know what I mean?
I
Like,
know.
they're soaking in those messages. So we have to be thinking about, how do we speak louder and more and as often as we can about this stuff. So what it may look like is it's just everywhere they go. So we don't have time to have like drug education, like stop everything else and they just get drug education for, an hour a week. So then how can we weave it into curriculum? How can there be curricular infusion where it is in science class, or they're having debates in social studies about legalization, or they are writing papers on things, or that, that can be, or even in math, they're bringing up statistics and talking about where statistics come from. It can be coming to them. Do you know what I mean?
No, that's so good. Those are all great ideas.
Right.
Yeah, how to mix
And
it in.
coming from their coaches, and coming from, just the, so that moves us to our second piece, which is looking at how do we collaborate to delay use? Because we know that the younger a kid goes there, the more likely they are to have a problem, and the worse those problems tend to be. So then what we're looking at as a school is, all right, so how do we collaborate across departments and across roles to be on the same shared goal of like, let's just try to get kids to delay this as long as possible, because that increases their chances, right?
Right.
And so that looks like I said, curricular infusion, like every staff member and beyond that, every staff member on campus realizing that they can play a role in this. Because if we know that school connectedness, for one, is one of the biggest protective factors that exists. So a kid feeling known, cared about, believed in, and valued by their school environment, that can be the bus driver. That can be the lunch lady that this kid feels seen by and cared about. I had a school where the janitor was the one that intervened with a kid because they kept catching this kid vaping in the janitor closet. And so they were the one that said, "Hey, what's going on? That you're kind of wanting to escape class and kind of escape life."
Right.
That was it. And it catalyzed it was a pivotal connection and moment for that kid.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, the administrator or the school counselor that has to be the one.
Right.
So it's kind of everybody recognizing on campus that they can, being informed, so they're all kind of giving the same messaging so that the staff members aren't wearing the brewery, hat.
Right. No, that's,
yeah. Or that they're not being like coffee loving counselor, because what are you normalizing? You're normalizing a physical addiction that comes with withdrawal, and you know what I mean? So it's just that awareness piece. And then there is the parenting or partnering with parents, which is huge, because they are also misinformed and overwhelmed and under-resourced. And so what information do they need? I mean, we have parents that are handing their kids vapes. We have a lot of parents that are vaping and or using in front of their kids, right? Especially as legalization is spreading, a lot more cannabis use happening, and kids getting this idea that it's normalized, and parents thinking it's still like the weed of like the 80s.
Right.
Which it's not.
Right. And just the fact that they're full adults, that their brains are developed further.
Right. So they don't know, they don't know that when a kid is vaping, it could be 90% THC, which is literally 9 times what the plant that somebody was using in the 90s.
Right.
They don't know, right? They don't know that that it can be laced with other things. They don't know, so parents getting the information on just the drug ed facts so that they care about what the choices that their kids are making. And also just kind of coaching on like, how do you have open dialogue in your family around substances and screens? And, how do you create expectations and limits, and make the family norms around that? How do you respond if your kid is getting into, risky or addictive screen behavior, or that you catch them vaping? What are the effective, artful ways of responding to that? All of those things that like parents don't know that. There's no reason why we don't get the guidebook.
Yeah.
So, and I find that they, of course, when a parent knows, I worked with some of the, this is going to sound horrible, like not the worst parents, but in some of my experiences, like there were parents that were extremely neglectful.
Mhm.
And I never had a parent that wanted to intentionally hurt their child.
Right.
Even
No,
when they were abusive, it wasn't intentional. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of, so I think parents getting that information can be really empowering, and that's support at how to parent through that. And then then the other big part of it is us collaborating with administration, because I think, they can tend to send it down river to us sometimes, right? It's like the school counselors will fix it.
right.
And that policy, we think of policy as an administrative thing, but the policy is not going to be effective if the school counselors aren't at the table in creating and continuing to co-create school policy, because we're the experts in the building on student behavior, on why they are doing what they're doing, why they're doing it, where they're doing it, and who's doing it, and
Right.
and on change, on what changes behavior. So it should be a hand, we should be holding hands in that process of creating, policy that is consistent, that is clearly communicated and understood. So that means it's not just in the handbook, it's
Mhm.
talked about out loud, and we know that the kids get it. And the hugest part is, just like in a family, we want that we just say, hey, policy is, we implement this policy, we create and implement it because of science and care. It's
Right.
shown to be bad for you, and we care about you enough that we don't want you to hurt yourself on our watch. So that lands really differently than, we just don't, this is just our job, and
Right.
we just want to control you because we're the grown-ups, you know, and all those ways that kids take in rules, right? Is that
Yeah.
so?
Definitely.
So we want to be part of creating policy that is educational, that is restorative, right? So alternatives to suspension are all the rage, by the ways that
Right.
we're finally shifting, because we know, as the psychological experts, right, that there's no proven evidence that punitive responses, or sending a kid home for 3 days when they vaped, does anything at
Right.
all
I
to
know. I feel
change.
like there's so many that have like a zero tolerance policy that goes straight to suspension.
Yeah, and it does nothing to address the roots of the behavior of why a kid is vaping. It does nothing to foster school connectedness. I mean, obviously it backfires. They've shown a lot of reasons. I mean, that's a whole, I can talk about that for a whole hour. But so and then the other piece is peer education. Huge. I mean, it's just been shown to be way more effective when the drug education, when the prevention messaging is created by students, when there's, or even policy, when you involve kids in focus groups that are, what do you think kids need to hear? What's the messaging? What's really happening, and what would make a difference for kids to hear and for them to be provided with? What do they need? We tend to do that for them and to them, and don't involve
Right.
them, and it's ridiculous.
I was just thinking that. Yeah. Like if we're like, ooh, I wonder how, like in the beginning, we were talking about, things that their values and speaking to their level. It's like how to know that is to ask them, to ask their
Right.
peers. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And my favorite thing is to involve the kids that have gotten busted in
Mhm.
that work. I mean, that's the double, that's like a
Right.
win-win, because they're transformed by that in a lot of cases. And they're the best person to be able to ask, like, what would you have needed
Right.
to not go here? What do you need now? And how do we, incorporate that into the system? So peer education, peer-led programming is huge. And every community that I have done a survey of, that the students say, we want, substance-free fun activities. We want alternatives. We want, actually, they really love having older kids, or kids who have had concerns about themselves, or have made choices not to use after having, kind of the been there, done that. They love that. And so using those students and highlighting, lifting up the voices of the students who are not using,
Right.
or who've had experiences that they're willing to share, that can be really powerful. Social norming, right? So that we know that, like, they all have this distorted idea that everybody's doing it.
Right.
And we know that they're more likely to go there when they think that that's what you need to do to be accepted. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But they have this because every time they go in the school bathroom, they smell vape juice. They think, quote unquote, in the teenage mind, everybody's vaping.
Right.
But but the fact is that there's 6 out of the 7 people in there that are not vaping. They just notice that somebody is, or when they smell weed in the hallway,
Mm-hmm.
at school, and it's always there. That smell doesn't mean everybody's doing it, right?
Right.
So being able to put that data out that says, again, what we know is that whatever 9 out of 10 kids are not doing this by senior
Mm-hmm.
year. Like they need to hear that data. So that's 2 parts of it. And then the third one is if we're going to say, hey, well, don't do this now, don't do this, or at least don't do this now,
Right.
then we need to help them figure out how. Because it's that resistance, the resistance skills, for peer resistance, for media resist, the media messages, and for family messages.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, that can be programming that is woven into classes. You can absolutely do media literacy classes in a social studies class. That's really relevant to talk
Right.
about, like, what are the strategies that they're using. But the media, I think, is one of the easiest things to go in on, because while they're swimming in it, they're doing it really blindly, right? It's kind of a brainwashing process, what's happening to them.
Right.
But nothing pisses off an adolescent more than being conned and manipulated, and hypocrisy. So it's just waiting for us to go in on and being able to highlight. So asking them questions, and whether that's in a class or whether it's when we've got a kid behind closed doors, and saying, like, so what do you think the agenda is of these companies?
Right. Yeah, I remember, and I took like a women's studies class in college, and we would watch commercials, of how women are portrayed in the media and
Yep.
magazines, things like that. Yeah, and it was great just to like dissect them and discuss, and
And you
yeah,
can't go back. Once
right.
you've seen it and thought about it, you can't undo. Like, I wish I could unknow some of those things, because I became the most annoying person to watch a movie or watch commercials with. I had to, like, do you see what they're doing?
Yeah.
People are like, lighten up, Kriya. But
Yeah.
yeah, so kids hate that, right? What is the agenda of these companies? Is it world peace and the betterment of everyone's mental health? Oh, it's not, it's getting rich.
Mhm.
Okay. So what's the best strategy? What if you were a executive of a vaping company? What strategy would you employ? What would you make your devices do? If your point is to make money, then what does it make sense to do with young people? They will
Mhm.
come to all this on their own. Oh, well, you want people to start using as young as possible. Okay. So then what are you going to do with your product? What are you going to do with your marketing? And so when they can come to the fact that all of these devices that look like highlighters and lipstick and hoodie
Mhm.
strings, and that now are gamified. There's competitions with puff challenges, and you get a point for every time you hit your vape, and you redeem it for swag. It's gotten that sick. And
Yeah,
it's
I did not
pairing
know
with,
that.
you can have a Bluetooth speaker vape. You can have a vape that plays Tetris and Pac-Man now.
Well,
So
this is making me think of, because you mentioned how this addiction proofing framework can work across addictions. And
mhm.
this is making me think of the screen time,
Yeah,
social media use, and how those executives clearly have an agenda and know the harms of it and how addictive it is,
yeah.
especially on young people. And they purposely design the algorithm, to manipulate.
That's
And
why, I mean, there's lawsuits galore, right? Right now, with social media and all the data and all the cases being made. And there's one right now that's ripe where they're collecting people for video gaming
Mm,
lawsuit, and how they have intentionally also, developed addictive
Right.
You're just using dopamine popping as
I
a
know. It's like the more we learn about the brain, but then the more people can kind of take advantage.
right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think having kids come to those conclusions on their own, like you were saying, like, let's look at this case study, look at this lawsuit. What do you think? Like, even
Yeah.
feeding that into a class, yeah,
And
would be.
then the hypocrisy piece too of like, okay, so what is this telling you? What is this? Let's look at this ad. Let's
Mhm.
look at this ad that came out at the Super Bowl, for beer, or let's look at this, you know, and again, remember they're seeing advertising that we are not seeing, right? That they are being targeted in ways that adults, once they're like, oh, you're over 30, okay, or you're over 40,
Right.
so they're bringing in examples of like, what is the stuff that you're seeing? What strategies do you think they're using? Oh, they're using influencers on social media, and they're using these celebrities that and they're talking about freedom and independence and kind of badassery. It's like these are not speaking to me. These are
Right.
not, so, but the hypocrisy of like, okay, so what are they telling you it's going to give you? What is this ad telling you that this product is going to give you? Friends, rock hard abs, energy to
Mhm.
like an
Yeah.
athleticism and popularity and all those things. It's like, okay, so does beer really make people feel like jogging?
Yeah, exactly. Get your abs
Does,
from.
does vaping give you like an amazing body or happiness, right? Because we
Right.
know the hypocrisy there is that nicotine damages serotonin production in the brain. For an adolescent that's using it, damages parts of the brain that are producing serotonin so that they long term are more likely to experience depression. Never mind that right now it heightens their stress responses and heightens their sense of anxiety and depression. So, and a lot of them are thinking it's it's helping with
Right.
those things that it's creating. So to be able to highlight that through media, how the media is full of crap, they
Right.
it can be powerful, right? And
Yeah.
then, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's so empowering
Yeah.
for the students to learn that and be like, oh, I don't have to fall for this. Like, I know the real reason behind this.
Because the whole point of our interventions, whether we're in a counseling group or a one-on-one counseling relationship with a kid, or we're looking at how to do more passive programming or bringing something in that's like a presentation or outsiders, but is that the whole intent is that we want to help them get the inner buy-in. They need to have the buy-in and be developing their own inner compass. So when we're talking about resistance skills, we can't just say like, well, here's the instructions at what you should do to steer through life healthily. They need to develop, and here's what not to do and what to do, and not, their sense of like, how do I navigate? Like, how do I have real skills that are going to be applicable to my real life, right now, and what that looks like. So all we can do is sort of guide them in that. But again, we have to be open to listening to what that looks like. What does peer pressure look like? That has to be the first question we ask before we launch into any kind of peer pressure lesson. We
Hmm.
have to ask, well, okay, what does it look like and sound like and feel like for you? Okay. So what is it? And most of them will say it is self-talk. A lot of it is self-talk,
Hmm.
right? It is, I feel like I should do this if these people I respect or want to be liked by are doing it,
Hmm.
or if I want to be included in this fun time and have memories to talk about, I feel like I should do it. It's very rarely, yes, somebody might be like, hey, you want to try this? Or, hey, I heard about this. But kids will say that it is 90% of self-talk. So then we know, okay, so that's what we go in on, is that then what these kids need, or this kid I'm working with needs some new ways, some thoughts to switch that up with, that are going to help them in these situations to steer through it.
Hmm.
So, and then thinking about, I think with the peer pressure piece is talking about what real friendship is, conversations about like, okay, so would you consider it a real friend if they led you in a direction that could hurt you? if they encourage you to do something that could hurt you or damage you or help you be like get in the way of your being successful or thriving, like, is that a good friend? And kids often don't connect with the fact that like the people that are providing them with substances, are their quote unquote friends.
Right.
And they're not questioning that with each other. Like, so here's this really addictive thing that's shown to cause trouble with brain processes and mental health. And your quote unquote friend is encouraging you to do it with them. So I think, stirring that up and having them question like how to be a good friend and to just kind of have the standards of what that means. And then talking to, as early as kindergarten, we can start talking about the uh-oh feeling in your gut when you do something, that doesn't feel right, about how to make boundaries for yourself and speak up for yourself and use your I messages and your self-advocacy. I mean, all of those skills are addiction resistance. They will help a kid in kindergarten. It might not seem like it's about drugs and and alcohol and self-harm and porn, but it's gonna be
right.
the
No, I
same
love
thing.
that too, because counselors ask like, how do I teach this developmentally appropriate? How do I teach this to 7-year-olds or 6-year-olds who aren't
Yeah.
necessarily like using yet, and we don't want to like overexpose them to things.
Right. But here's the tricky part with that is that we kind of have to talk about everything that they're seeing. And so, and remembering that kids are wiring together meaning and wiring together attitudes and values on their own. When they see the ads and they see the flashing signs and they see that, they see their family doing something, we're not introducing it to them. They're wiring it. It might be unconsciously, but without us helping them disassemble that, is because we have kids bringing vapes into school. I mean, I'm hearing about it as early as kindergarten. They're getting them from home.
Right.
They're seeing how they're being used and passing them around, sticking them underneath the school bus seat, and all the second graders are using it. Like, just talk to one of those counselors.
Yeah.
So we do need to bring it up. Now, we don't have to like over dwell and over instruct, but we can ask them, hey, what are you seeing and what do you know about this? And we can talk about addiction as like, it's like a spell that takes you over. And once you start doing this thing, it's really hard to break the spell. That can be a 5-year-old way of talking about addiction. And then, of course, that advances as we go up, but so that, and then the family discussions can be similar to, I mean, they're a little stickier. So, this isn't something necessarily that an advisor is going to be doing. So, one of the things we can do, by the way, is encourage, along with curricular infusion, how can you have some of these conversations in like advisory groups, right? Or in your soccer team or whatever. But the family part is, as counselors, is we can have those conversations of like, we all have these things that we want to inherit and that we don't from our parents, like, how do you feel about your father's drinking, or vaping, or what do your parents do with their phones at home? I mean, we can have those conversations. And I love it when a kid gives us a little nugget of like, I hate, when the car smells like vape stuff when I get in the car. My dad's, uses marijuana at home and it stinks and I hate it, or whatever. We need to pounce on that and be like, well, it sounds like you want to have a different relationship with this. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to have that? We don't want to drive by any of those moments, right?
Right. Oh, that's so good. This is great.
So without judging, so without judging their parents, we can find a way to sort of examine that, or help them explore that and help them be resistant to it without judging or questioning, what their parents are doing necessarily.
Right. I know, because it can be so tricky if it is something legal and not necessarily problematic, but still not the healthiest choice. It gets messy for sure.
Yeah, but it's still like, yeah, but for you right now, right? That's the message. We're not debating, because a kid will come in. We want to kind of roll with that. Like be able to discuss the complexity and the hypocrisies, or the, there's a complexity of it all, because yes, are adults using THC and cannabis, different forms of cannabis to medicate their bipolar disorder in effective ways?
Right.
Yes. Are they using ketamine,
Right.
or psilocybin to break through depression in ways that nothing else has worked? Yes. And and those people have fully formed brains and bodies.
Right.
And it's a completely different impact on a adolescent.
Mhm.
And even heavy use of those things, and that can still be addictive. It can still be problematic also for adults. So it still requires regulation and
Yeah.
responsibility and healthy limits and all those things. So we can
Yeah, I
still talk
love
about
this.
those things.
I love the approach of just talking about it with the students, talking about the nuances instead
Mhm.
of just, I feel like how we received the drug prevention education, which was very just like, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do. Just really involving them in the conversation is great.
Yeah.
We shared with us so many things as far as like weaving it into curriculum, working with parents, things counselors can do. If a counselor is listening to this and they're not doing anything right now and they want to get started, what do you recommend? What's like a small way they could get started at their school?
Yeah, well, I think because the last two pieces are quick ones, because that kind of leads into that question, is that of the sort of five parts of the model, is that the next one is about values and goals. And so this is something that we can do because we can collaborate with other staff, and because we know that the clearer that a kid is on who they want to be, what they believe in, what they want for themselves, and that's on the front burner of their brains, the more likely they are to weave every decision they make through that, through that screening, right? It's kind of screen it through there. So whether it's like, what classes do I take? Who should I date? Who should I be friends with? Should I start having sex? Should I play these kind of video games, or or
Right.
or doing drugs? So we can do some activities, whether it is, and again, this can be in it. A lot of schools have advisory groups, or they've got 15 minutes or a half an hour here
Right.
and there. Is that there's fun ways to do like values exploration, activities. You
Thinking
can
like
do
a
value.
vision board activity or something would be
Yeah,
fun.
I have a whole bundle on Teachers Pay Teachers because I wanted to be able to be able to provide
Yeah.
something that is that's like, you can do an auction, you can answer these fun questions and talk about them, you can, so there can be like a checklist that's a rate these 1 to 5, and lists all these
Mhm.
different values, so kids can explore their values and then have discussions about, okay, so what are you, well, if we're talking about prevention, how could substances, again, if we're honing in on vaping, honing in on screens, how could these things interfere with these values that you hold important to you? What could that look like so that you're helping them create limits? And that
Right.
can be, again, that can be a one-on-one counseling discussion, because especially when we come to early intervention, is we can use that same discussion of like, okay, let's talk about, so you're vaping, I get it. What are the ways that this is actually like in harmony with these values that you have?
Right.
You say that it's bringing you some belonging, and you say it's bringing you some feel good feels. It's popping off, it's popping off the feel good chemicals. And that's one of your main needs that we all have, right? That makes sense. But I also heard you say that you're getting this reputation that you really are uncomfortable with, right? Or that you really value freedom, and that
Mhm.
you feel kind of free and like you're in control of your own life and you're all grown up when you're doing this thing, but at the same time, but now like the school's looking over your shoulder and they don't trust you to walk around campus by yourself, or
Right.
your parents, have you on super lockdown at home, or they're not letting you go to your friends anymore. Like sounds like, how is that impacting this value that you have? So
Right.
we can implement that again with any of these things, into conversation, or encourage other staff to weave that in. What are you doing in line with your values and that are conflicting, right? Or
Mhm.
with your goals. And then the last piece is really thinking about, so kind of a, model within the model, I think, is looking at the needs that they have, that all adolescents have. And basically it is these five. They need fun and thrilling experiences because they have a dip in dopamine and their brains are literally craving dopamine. So that whole thrill-seeking adolescent thing is real. That is brain-based. Our ADHD kids are dopamining even more. They're looking for the dopamine where they can, right? So they need that. They want belonging and connection more than they ever will again. They are trying to confidence and identity, right? They're trying to figure out who they are and then like that person. And they want some sense of control over their life because so far everybody else has controlled them. And as they start to go into adolescence, they want to feel grown up and feel in control. And then the last one is huge, which is they want, they need coping skills. They want to feel secure and not feel, distressed, right?
Right.
So looking at each of these kids, whether they got busted, and again, we want to be pushing ourselves to the table of those discussions when a kid has gotten in trouble. Because we want to be able to, whether it is preventative or it is like tier 1 or tier 2. So we've got kids that we know are at risk, or there's a kid that's gone there. We want to be able to pull out, okay, what are of these 5 needs? What does this kid have and what are they missing? Where do they have gaps? And that is another discussion that we can immediately have when you're asking about what can we do right away, is that we can look at these kids that we have concerns about, and say, okay, where are the holes for them? And then what can we help them access? What can we point them towards? What can we provide them with on our watch? How can we collaborate with these other grownups that care about them? What activities do they need? What outlets do they need? What do their parents need to help them meet these needs for this? Because that's the elevator speech version, is that if kids have satisfying ways that they can access to meet those 5 needs, then these addictive things won't be as appealing. But if they've got a hole in any of those areas, it doesn't matter whether it is food or it is attention from boys or it is self-harm or it's vaping, if it fits in and satisfies that need better than anything else, then that's when the game is on, right? So there's some activities, and I'm going to make sure that your listeners have access to these, because I actually have worksheets and activities that go with all of these, what I'm suggesting. So having ways of, in a class, you can have an advisory group, you can have a discussion about like, hey, how do we all meet these needs? Where do we have gaps in them? What are some ideas that you have for each other? In a caring classroom or a small group, you can make that a group activity, but you can really do it with a kid. And if a kid is using, you can ask the question of, so which of your needs are you meeting with your use?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Whatever the quote unquote substance is.
Right.
What is it? And then you can also sort of say like, okay, and what do you notice about where it's backfiring? Because again, that's the motivational enhancement piece, right? Is when you can lead them through that, either that values discussion or through these meeting needs discussions, for them to get, oh, this is actually working against me. This thing that I thought I was doing because I need it, or I like it and it's working. We want to help them be able to just have that aha moment of like, oh, maybe it's not working as much as I want it to. And maybe I do want to make some changes in it.
I love that. Thank you so much. And yeah, any resources you have, we'll link to in the show notes. Awesome. For the counselors. Yeah, this has been so helpful. I have so many ideas after talking with you, Kriya. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. And I love that, like you said, it's cross category, right? So regardless of if it's self-harm or technology or vaping, we can use these same strategies. Where can the listeners find you if they want to connect and follow up?
Yeah, and I would love that. I'm on most of the socials. So I am on Facebook and Instagram with 2 accounts. I've got Counseling with Pizzazz, which is just named after my Teachers Pay Teachers store, and then which is so just for educators. And then I have Kriya Counselor on Facebook and on Instagram and on TikTok. And I do video content and things, particularly for anybody that plays any role in raising kids kind of towards and through adolescence and young adulthood. So you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise on this topic. I think the counselors are going to love this episode.
Let me tell you this too. Sorry. we could
No
splice
worries.
this in. I also on my website, I have some resources I'm really proud of because I have painstakingly curated them so that you don't have to.
Yeah, that's the
So
best.
so I've got 3 sections that are really meaty that you can use as counselors or provide to parents too. And one of them is about adolescent brains, one about substance use, and one on screen health.
Oh,
And
great.
I keep them all updated. And the screen health one in particular, I'm super, I everything that a parent needs to talk about predators, to talk about addictiveness, to talk about how do I create safe, guidelines around this and how can I do that cooperatively with my kid? Like all of that stuff is in there. So I encourage you to go there. And if they want to become members of my website, which just means you're on my newsletter list and I send one a month and they're like meaty and short.
Yeah.
But if you go to my website, it says when you go to educator, the educator section, it'll say members only. And if all you do is provide your email, you're on my list. But what happens then is it opens up to this portal of awesome. And and it's like this VIP section where every worksheet that I create, everything I do, because I do parent and fit coaching as well as private practice, and everything that I use in my practice, I drop in there for other counselors to use.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
So everything I have mentioned and the tools to help facilitate it you can find in there. So
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, yes, we will link to all of that. You guys go sign up, get on Kriya's newsletter so you can get all of these awesome free resources to use with your students. So thank you so much for your time. And I've learned so much. This has been awesome.
good.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.